Hey, Alexander, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a real honor to have you on the show.
What's up, Patrick?
For the audience out there who, somehow is not familiar with your work just yet, would you mind telling them a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah. So a very condensed life story as to how I got here. Um, so I'll go back a few years. So my original plan was to be a ballet dancer in college. That didn't work out. I got a liberal arts degree. Realized the degree was worthless. Got into personal training because that was the only job that paid more than minimum wage that I was qualified to do. So I started personal training over 10 years ago. Technically, I've never stopped doing that. I sort of built a career in the fitness industry. And in the last 5 years, approximately, I've built an online following off of being a subject matter expert on fitness. And that's grown on Twitter. It's grown on Instagram. I have a newsletter. And I built what is today called like a solo entrepreneur business. It's all entrepreneurship. 5 years ago, that wasn't really a term that anyone took seriously, the idea of doing something by yourself literally that way. Today, it's become sort of a novel idea. It's because the online digital market has grown tremendously by literally the trillions. And suddenly this possibility exists that you can literally just work for yourself. And if you have expertise and some level of credibility in something, you can also entertain and you can medically market yourself. You can potentially create an audience, and now you have a business that operates. So that's what I've done. My name has maybe come to prominence to some level because I've done a lot of public speaking the last few years at various conventions. I have how would you say, I guess like an elite level circle of internet friends who are also well known. Mike Cernovich, Ed Lattimore, the Manosphere, the Tate brothers. So there's a sort of this online collective movement, I think, that's taking hold of the internet right now, where people are looking for people that seem to be living ahead of the curve. And I would like to think of myself as being one of those people. So that's how we're having this conversation right now.
Yeah, I believe we first met at a Cernovich event a couple of years back.
Yes.
And, I've been following your content before that and beyond. And, it's remarkable to see, your success continue to accumulate. And, a lot of the, sort of where you've pioneered is becoming, like you said, more and more mainstream. It's becoming something that we're starting to define terms around. And I want to kind of go back to that origin of how you got to that place in your life. It's easy in retrospect to look back and be like, oh, you became a solopreneur, you did, this and that. But when you're on the beginning of that spectrum, there's nothing to compare yourself to. There's no guidepost. There's no direction pointing you to where you are today. So where did that begin? Where were the seeds of sort of developing your own personal business on the internet and sort of going an alternate path from likely what, the generations before us have been able to do?
Yeah, social expectations. That's a good point. So, I mean, growing up, I was never computer savvy. I was not internet savvy. My original red pill moment, so to speak, it came in college during the Great Recession, where the county I grew up in California, Riverside County, it was somewhere around 1 in 3 to 1 in 4 people lost their homes. So I knew I had friends, my own family, they had to move out of the house, and that was this catalyzing wake up moment where it didn't make sense to me that the whole economy had crashed. It didn't make sense to me how were so many people caught off guard. And at that age, you don't know necessarily what's true, but you can at least begin to distinguish what is false. And that's where the cracks formed in like the common narrative of go to college, get a job, and everything works out, because I saw that very visibly not work. At the same time, I was getting a liberal arts education that I realized probably about a year into it that this is not a useful degree. This idea that if you go to college, you're going to make $1 million more than someone that doesn't. Okay, there's some relevant truth to that, but education is not created equal. There's a whole horde of degrees today, and I mean this has become a running joke, right? To joke about liberal arts degrees, and you got a degree in women's studies, and there's lots of cliches around this. 10 years ago, that really didn't exist. It was, you were just told if you were in high school during 1990s, go to college. You have to go to college. It doesn't matter what it is. So this was like 2008, 2009. I realized that, this degree is not really worth anything. I'm not gonna have any real job skills. Like what can I do? And I would never be considered a good employee. I'm not a readily employable person. I had this big long checklist of things I just flat out refused to do. I don't like to compromise anything. So I told myself then, I'm not going to ever work in an office. I'm never going to sit for my job. I'm not going to work at a computer. I'm not. So I had all these things, all these no's. So what could I say yes to? The only thing that seemed sensible was I could be a personal trainer, because I like being in the gym. And it's a job at the time, not doing it seemed easy. So let's go with that. And also paid like $16 an hour, which minimum wage in California at that time was, it may be 8 or 9, and maybe most entry-level jobs would pay you 10. So $16 an hour, good, cool. So I started doing that. This is 2010, 2011. And I did that for a number of years until 2016. And what started to change in the industry a few years into it is that right around 2012, I would say around 2011 to 2014, there was suddenly this rise in the internet within the fitness world of being what we would today call an influencer. Nobody had names for any of this at the time. You're like, it's always interesting when you see these social movements develop, where like something's happening, you can see patterns happening. Clearly there's this mass effect taking place, but it doesn't have a name. And until something has a name, people tend to think that it doesn't really exist. It's sort of like one of the phenomenons of being a human being. If you can't name something, somehow we can just blank it out. So I saw this happening where I saw other people in the fitness industry where they were becoming known for being a writer. This is when having a blog was very much a big deal. And then in 2013, I discovered Cernovich. In 2014, I started working for John Meadows. God rest his soul, he passed away recently. He was an IFBB pro bodybuilder who came to prominence. And I started writing for one particular website, leofts.com. I started writing for magazines as well. And I was able to get a hold of the internal logistics of the internet, basically, which this is the stuff the average person doesn't pay attention to, where it's like with traffic, conversion rates, views. And I realized that online business, it's just numbers. It's no different than a brick and mortar business. You open up a physical location in the real world. We call it the real world. I call it the metaverse. Everything's merged together. But real world, you open up a business. How many customers are coming in? Well, you figure that out based on location, foot traffic, the type of business. You're going to try to market to bring people into the door. An online business, where's your traffic coming from? How many eyes are on your content? How many people are buying from you? These are all calculable things. It's not magic. Business is numbers, as I always say. So I saw this, and I saw people that were getting popular, and I thought in my mind, like, I think I could do this. And I was already building a following with writing. But to craft an effective online business, it takes a particular set of skills. And I didn't want to do coaching. And that's usually the first thing people think, like, oh, coaching, do online coaching. That doesn't scale. It doesn't scale because it's still an exchange of dollars for hours, fundamentally.
Yep.
What I did see happening, and this came from working with John, and also some of the mentors that I had. One of them, very noble gentleman, he was also dead, unfortunately. Rest in peace. Bob Illenfelt. He was a magazine editor for Muscle and Fitness. He had also been the editor for 531, which is a very, very popular strength training book by Jim Wendler. Maybe some of the audience has heard of it. And he told me something that really changed my life, honestly. He told me a few things. He told me, one, that you can write. You have the gift of writing. If you don't use it, you're wasting your life. And I was about 24 at the time, and I internalized that. And I still live by it. And then he told me about the numbers behind some popular ebooks that were selling at the time for different people in the fitness industry. 531 was one of them. Carb Night, Carb Backloading was another. And these ebooks, they're typically around $20 to $30 and $40, $50 even. And he told me at the time, I mean, this was 2014, that 531, and I've never seen the actual hard copy web shop. This is Bob's words. That Bob told me that ebook sold over 100,000 copies. And I did the math in my head. I'm like, wait, 100,000 copies at $30? Holy shit, what? Like, it's like light bulb moment. And I had bought it myself. And it suddenly hit me that, wait, like, there's a market for educational products. People will buy things on the internet. And what we call ebooks or courses, like, oftentimes those are criticized as being like bullshit. But in reality, they're almost the equivalent of like an online textbook, because unlike a regular generic book that you pull off the shelf in the bookstore, you can craft an ebook or course to solve a very specific problem for a specific individual, and you can tailor it directly to your audience, and you can update it, you can communicate with them. It gives you a connection and a relationship with that person that a regular paper book actually does not. And I saw there was a market for this. I was like, I could do something with this. I know I could. And it wasn't until the end of 2016 I sort of fully went in on that business and started writing my own programs. I mean, it was slow the first year. I remember the first time I made, like $200 online. It might maybe 200 or 400, something like the first month. It was not a was not a substantial income. It was more like a side hustle, but it gave me proof of work that this could be done. And then I've been building it ever since. And the way I saw the internet develop as it's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, it's now a flood of information. It's just a torrent. We live in a deluge of information from every platform, every app, 24/7. You can't really escape it at all. So what do people look for when they're in that kind of flood? They look for, quote unquote, authenticity. What's authenticity? They're looking for a real person. Most people don't share that much online. Actually, if you look at the numbers, somewhere around 90% of the content online is made by 10% of the people that actually use the internet.
Wow.
And that's for any platform, whether it be Instagram or TikTok or Twitter or even Facebook. The majority of posts are made by a very small percentage of people. And with institutional trust declining, globally, especially in the United States, people don't want to buy from a company. They don't want to. They no longer buy, let's say, like a magazine off the shelf. Muscle Fitness, all those magazines now have lost huge market share. What do they want? They want to go to an individual. They want to actually see somebody, talk to somebody, watch their videos, learn from that person that they feel like, okay, this person's trustworthy. They're going to give me worthwhile information. They've lived a real life. Hopefully, they know what they're talking about. So I saw all this happening, over this period of years, and that's where I inserted myself into that. I'm like, okay, I could become a fitness guy, and not just fitness. I could talk about all these things I'm talking about now and incorporate kind of into my marketing and make it what I call like very meta. So even in the act of marketing itself, I'm not just doing this. Oh, buy my stuff. I can tell you that I can watch you buy my stuff. I could tell you. I could describe you all my strategies. I can pull back the curtain, so to speak, and be very transparent about all of my work. Everything I produce. So there's no pretense at all. What does that do? It builds trust. Like it still makes me laugh sometimes when I do, sales emails, for example, where I'll at the very beginning of the email, this is a sales email. I want you to buy this. And I have people write me back where and obviously the stuff sells. We're like, I love that you write that, because it's just, there's no, versus the usual bullshittery of trying to buy something online with this really long sales page. And you're going to write this very contrived copy in this bullet point style with these hyperbolic claims. You'll just say outright, you should buy this. This will help you lose body fat. Do or don't. It's your choice. I don't give a shit. But it works. And obviously, it's allowed me to build a business. It's given me immense time freedom that I think is pretty unparalleled.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one thing that I'm noticing just right off the bat is, you clearly have a demonstrated ability to spot trends, and that goes in both directions. So one being understanding that there's a wave coming for the internet trend, and being able to grab onto that, create content, and engage with an audience to be able to build influence and have a digital business. The other being spotting the way that things have been done and going the other direction. So rather than the corporate magazine type of content, pull the curtain back, reveal the tricks, show the secrets, and develop authenticity in a way that really didn't exist in the old world, that could only exist in the new digital one. And so it's sort of this combination of spotting which direction things are flowing and grabbing onto the current and going with the flow. Where does that, you mentioned sort of the red pill moment for you is starting to notice that the conventional way of life wasn't, or what you had been told about college and degrees and, education and how that tied to your income wasn't going to be a realistic picture for you, and maybe for anyone in the future. But where did that, do you have any sort of instance or time where you noticed at first that, sort of spotting trends and understanding the sort of the flow of events to be able to capitalize?
I would say it started young. I was not a particularly good student in school and academia. I didn't care for school at all. It bored me, most of it, but I have always been a student of human behavior. And when I was younger, especially in K through 12, I always was I very much enjoyed history. And history, the way it's commonly thought of, is it's just dates and things that happened already. Why do we need to study this? But what you realize if you study history to any serious level is that history is a recollection of human psychology. Why do things happen? And you realize that nothing really happens randomly. There's no trend that develops. There's no social movement that emerges out of a vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
If you study the history of any civilization, any country, any group, you can see that there is this progressive evolution from, let's say, a small individual collective to increased cooperation, to then engineering the environment around them, to then expanding, to then this necessity of economic resources, then folding in more people in the population. And you can see this rise, you can see this fall. And in each epoch in history has its values. And you see this even in the United States. Whereas today we live like in a very fundamentally cynical time period. There's no vision for the future really, other than the one of fragmentation. You go back 60, 70 years, post World War II, the whole of the population is sort of high on victory. We've done it. We've won. What else can we do? There's a spirit of enthusiasm, and that drives obviously a lot of innovation, drives the space program. And at the same time, there's always like a dark undercurrent of, what about human rights? What about oppression? What about these various issues? But you can track all that. One of the terms I always like to use, which I still find funny that it's not common usage, but Isaac Asimov's Foundation series, psychohistory, is what sort of he deems it as. And that series sort of traces this idea that you can, the Foundation series is a series which describes this meta concept where you can, in fact, reverse engineer, human development, and you can plan it out for the future and what's important, in so many words. And so those books actually were very influential. I read them when I was probably like 10 or 11, 12 years old. And I'd always sort of paid attention to things. I liked reading the newspaper when I was a kid. And then over time, sort of what happened like with the Red Pill moment and the Great Recession, I was like, I've been reading this newspaper my whole life. How come nobody could predict this? Like, how did this emerge out of nowhere? It didn't make sense to me at all. And for anyone that grew up in the 1990s, up until probably the Great Recession, even more than 9/11, there was this legitimate sort of what was even called then like the end of history time period of the prosperity is going to increase. Life will keep getting better. Neoliberalism won. Like the world's going to be more united. Like this is never going to stop.
Yeah.
And that just came to an absolute halt. And then that's fallen apart. Today that'd be laughable, to sort of say that kind of idea. Like it's there's a huge, probably 50-50 split now. And even for the people that want to promote that, they know that it's not being received well. It's become bullshit. So I saw that kind of fraction fall apart, and I saw my own family members, like this extended family, where they were poorly adapted to the future. The world that existed from, I would say, probably like 1945 to 2005, where you could legitimately just get a good job and pay into your retirement fund, and homes would be relatively affordable. Obviously, some places are more expensive than others, but there was this sweet spot time period where you didn't have to think too much. You had to work and get your paycheck and make your income and pay your bills and pay your mortgage, and life would work out. And that's no longer the situation. And I saw the end of that. So what comes next afterwards? So my life, probably since I was in my teen years, I'd say, has been trying to find those answers. And then what I eventually arrived at, like with the Sovereign Individual book, is that you're going to actually have to legitimately figure this out yourself. And the tools exist. The tools certainly exist to engineer freedom, to engineer, financial education, to engineer financial independence. But there are no set paths. And the people that do this, they're not going to, as you said at the beginning, they're not going to look like anyone that's done this before, because it has legitimately never been done before. This Bitcoinization, fragmentation, balkanization of human history, like this is actually quite unprecedented. And we consider the tools that the average person has compared to even 20 years ago. Anyone can have a social following. Anyone can reach millions of people. the same engineering tools that CNN uses are the same ones that are available to you and I.
Yeah.
Like there's no difference. Everybody has the potential for immense leverage, which is legitimately just extraordinary when you think about it. So that becomes, what are you going to do with it?
Absolutely.
So you have to be very the thing is, like, there's definitely this sentiment at times where people are like, they don't want to pay attention. They don't want to pay attention to politics. They want to not ignore social media. Oh, this sucks. But like, I don't think it sucks at all. But if you want to be ahead of the curve, you have to know where the curve is. You actually have to pay attention to the world around you. You cannot isolate yourself and be in the stereotypical cave and assume everything's going to work out well. It's not.
I think you nailed it right there, where, it's like, if you want to be ahead of the curve, you have to know where the curve is. And I think another point that you said about how there was that sweet period where, which was very much where, like, probably our parents, grandparents are growing up and living in, where you didn't have to think too hard about, where things were headed. It seemed, beautiful and majestic world that we're entering into of peace, love, and world's happiness was upon us. But now we're sort of looking around, and that's not the case. And I think we've especially seen that in the past couple of years. And so there's this kind of issue where the people immediately ahead of us in the generational chain are not exactly paying attention to the technological developments, the disruptions in the marketplace that are happening and unfolding so quickly that now there's a lot of people who are still not paying attention, but sort of to understand the world that we're moving into and to be able to prepare for it and experience it in a somewhat pleasant way, you have to be able to spot that curve and understand what's going on and sort of start paying attention. And so that's sort of like something that I think about quite a bit, is how do you activate people? How do you get them going? And for you, you mentioned the red pill moment, which I think a lot of people on the internet, especially in this sphere, can kind of describe as the moment where they realize that, whatever their conventional thinking was, whatever they thought they could do with their life was not going to work out, and they had to change. And it usually requires some sort of hardship, some real life experience, metaverse experience, where you're going to experience that there's a conflict with your belief system, and you're going to have to, like, get past that and get over it. For you, I mean, I witness you red pilling people on the internet, like it's a side job or something. And I'm curious, sort of like, what have you seen in that experience of being able to wake people up from that fugue state of, how people could live in the past versus where we're headed in the future?
Well, there are expectations, and then there's reality. And those two things do not always line up. They may not line up at all. What we've seen the last few years since, let's just say, Trump's election, to the election of Biden, where there's been a breakdown of social order, and that's widely acknowledged at this point, that the country is no longer united. But even with the past, or the current pandemic, vaccines. Yep. Oh, you need to get a vaccine. Oh, you need a booster. You'll need another booster. Actually, all your boosters now outdated. You're gonna need a fourth booster. Oh, wait, what? That's not what I agreed to. I thought we just needed the one or the two. Now you're telling me it's 3 or 4. We're going to restrict your movement with a vaccine passport, but it's not really a passport, but it's basically a passport. What? I mean, this has become a running joke for those of us who are, more aware, but that everything that we were told would not happen by the powers that be has happened. Lockdowns, shutdowns, loss of small businesses, restrictions on movement, mobility, loss of individual freedoms. That's all happening. Are people really waking up? That I don't know. Yeah, it's always very nice to think that there's just going to be a sort of collective revolution. This elevation in human consciousness. This has been talked about since the 1960s. If you go back to the rhetoric during that time period, Terence McKenna, some of the people that were, the leading figureheads of, like, the 1960s consciousness revolution. The world's going to change. We're all going to become more empathetic and understand each other better. That really didn't work, did it? Maybe it did for a period of time, but maybe that was just very much a collective delusion. But the life was obviously very different then for a multitude of reasons. But I don't worry so much about needing to wake people up en masse. What I focus on is more so, like, sort of like the book of Isaiah. You're looking for the remnant. The remnant being that group of people who are a minority of the people, where they realize something's wrong and they want to come out ahead of the situation. And that can be done many ways. That can be done through education. That can be done through memes. Memes get laughed at all the time, but memes are powerful because it's a form of satire.
Absolutely.
And with the death of comedy the last few years, where you can't really joke about anything, memes give you the opportunity to point out hypocrisy, to point out contradiction. They actually do. That's why they're so sticky. Like, you can actually post memes, people literally look at them and be like, "Oh, fuck, that's right." You can't underrate that. And then just being someone where you are freely expressing yourself and you're not afraid to be critical of the powers that be, or you're not afraid to be critical of social movements, or you can identify those idiosyncratic trends that are taking place that some people just, like we were saying before, they don't necessarily pay attention to. And all that contributes to helping people become more aware, more self-aware. Like with that, like I said, with that said though, I don't have any delusions that there's going to be this like mass movement and everything will change overnight. Societies take decades to evolve. And they may evolve or they may devolve. It could go both ways. If you study the history of social movements, you go back to Italy, 1920s fascism, how that developed. That developed over 30 years. It didn't just happen one night. Oh, Italy's fascist now. It's like, no, that was a result of a whole bunch of sociological issues. It started around like the turn of the century, and they just kept getting worse. They kept getting more divisive. They became more prominent. The 1960s revolution, civil rights era, that something happened overnight. Like, oh, racism's over. No, that was a result of many decades of a huge, probably massive, an infinite list of racial issues and tension and strife, where finally it came to a head. Finally that became the social issue of the day. So right now, like, we're certainly in a liminal time period where things are breaking down. I don't expect the other side to be broken through for at least probably another 5 to 6, maybe 10 years, maybe around 2030. So what do you do in the time period? I would equate it to almost being a time, maybe it's not the Great Recession right now, but similar to the Great Recession in a way that you're just going to have to survive. And, better yet, you're going to have to learn how to thrive, which, thankfully we have more tools now to do that than we did then.
Yes, certainly. And if anything, it's sort of seeing the double-sided effect of the internet. On one hand, there's people are in information silos that divide people, and like that you could meet someone on the street and you could have almost the same philosophy about things, but because you've had completely different information sources, you could think that you hate each other. And on the other hand, you can connect with people that are, around the world that share the same belief system as you with the internet, and it can bring people together. It can prepare people better for the future that we're entering into. And it's sort of, both directions, this tool is like changing everything about the nature of human relationships, at least in my opinion. And not to try and, I don't want to hypothesize too much or get like too vague or anything, but I'm always curious to get people's take on sort of like, what are some of those specific things that are happening in the future that we should be prepared for? Because, and also to not sound like too like doom and gloom and, like the world is ending or anything, because just with that opportunity, with the change, with the shifts and everything that's going on, there's opportunity to prosper in this new environment. And then there's people who aren't paying attention. They're not spying the curve, and they're going to ultimately, be victim to whatever direction the current takes them. So it's like, in your mind, like, what are some of the indications of the new changes what are some of the indications to you of the transformations in society right now that people could prepare for? And what are some of the things that to you would be like a signal that something big is happening?
That's a good question. The term I would use to sort of designate this set of changes, I would call it like Neofeudalism would be the term if I had to give it a name.
Neofeudalism.
So, Neofeudalism. Let's give it a name. But what you've seen happen the last, arguably 40 years since going off the gold standard, since the modern monetary system was put into place, and this modern monetary theory, which is basically deficit spending, where you can always print more money because you can stay ahead of the debt so long as the economy grows. It won't be a problem. It probably will be a problem eventually, but let's pretend that it won't be. So we end up in this economic structure, which you could call like what I call like predatory capitalism. I got that from Anand Girandas. He's a New York Times writer, which I think he probably has me blocked on Twitter, but whatever. But his book was good. But you have this predatory capital structure to the world, and this is not a criticism of capitalism outright, but the current state of capitalism. And this is, like I said, this is not to promote Marxism, but you have this capitalistic structure where the most important guiding value to every company in the world is, are we making a profit? It's not to the community, it's not to the state, it's not to the country, it's not to the public good, it's to our shareholders, and are we making money? And we have made the dollar, we have made profit, sort of the highest form of good. So that's a very amoral system. And that creates a system that's very ripe for exploitation. So if you look at like Wood's Neofeudalism, well, you're going to create this economic structure where you're going to have extreme wealth inequality. And this is all statistically supported. Like I'm not pulling this out of my ass, obviously. You can go look this up.
Absolutely.
So you have extreme wealth inequality, and you have a very small group in which all the wealth is concentrated, and assets really. And then you have everybody else. And everybody else who's not in the wealthy bracket, what are they doing? They're basically living their lives by subscription. So you're paying rent, you're paying on a lease, you're probably going to be, you're paying for healthcare. What is healthcare? What is health insurance? It's basically a rental system. Everything's become a subscription-based business. Even with the current vaccine class.
Yeah.
There's talk about like, oh, you might need to get like a subscription. What was it, like a vaccine booster each month? Like what? Why are they doing this? Because it's money. Because they'll make money. That truly is the answer. I mean, it's like, why? Money. Why is BlackRock buying millions of dollars worth of single family homes and starter homes? Because money. Because now you have a community where it's going to be owned by an asset management corporation. Oh, we're going to rent this house, and that's money. And I don't see that changing anytime soon, because that system does allow you to scale. It does allow companies a lot of flexibility to sort of do what they want. Is that good for the individual? Probably not. Is that good for a state? Probably not. Is that good for even a country itself? No, because you're really putting power you're creating a power structure that's extremely plutocratic, which will probably eventually evolve into a kleptocracy, where people can sort of steal from the economy. And you see that even in less developed countries, where they're sort of like beholden to mega corporations. They have no freedom. But that's all, like, that's developing right now. Like that's not, like I said, it's not anything that's novel idea. Like that is happening today. It's going to keep happening. So what do you do in that situation? You have to build personal wealth. You have to control how you make money yourself. Hopefully you are self-made, self-paid. Asset-wise, like what assets can you own? Of course, you could own land. You could own, you could own your possessions outright. Crypto represents this sort of, once in history opportunity where you can buy into an asset class and a communications network and an economy where it's not beholden actually to any one dominating individual or group of individuals. So, that's why crypto is so powerful, amongst other reasons, because, it takes away the monopoly that banks have, that the current economic system has. So, so there are ways to go about it, but, this requires being technologically savvy. Having a wallet that you store coins on, like you have to actually know what the fuck you're doing. And crypto for a lot of people is still something that's very scary, or it's very unknown. Like, how does it even really work? What's a blockchain? What does that even mean?
Yeah.
And then at the same time too, like, oh, start your own business. I say this all the time on Twitter: start your own business, quit, start your own business. It's like, well, why? Well, as of like 2 days ago, a whole bunch of people found out they're going to be fired for not getting vaxxed. Oh, like, oh, gee, like, maybe you should have started a business a year ago. And it's funny. I had a few people message me when I posted that, were like, wow, yeah, you always should post that, but like, I wish I had listened to you sooner. Like, I got that message from you. Like,
I'm sure.
I don't say this shit just to say it. And then I had people messaging me like, I saw what you posted. Like, I quit my job a year ago and did start my own business. And like, it's so good to know that this doesn't affect me. It's like, good, fantastic.
Wow.
The answer to control is to increase your personal independence, and you can do that. You're not being stopped from working for yourself. You're not being stopped from making your own money. Honestly, you're not, even with travel being somewhat restricted, you're not being stopped from the state that you want to live in or the people you want to connect with. So we still have an immense level of personal freedom. For a serf that was living in 16th century, 14th century Europe, you were pretty much stuck in whatever village you were in. You couldn't go to the next country over and like, oh, fuck this.
Yeah.
I'm not going to work for you anymore, Mr. Lord. I'm going to go over this place. Like, you could try, but it would be difficult. You're going to be literally doing it on foot. Today, you don't like the state you're in? Go to a different one. I mean, we've seen that exodus already in the United States. California and New York City, it's kind of getting shitty. Let's go over to this better run, more red state. Like why is Florida exploding right now? Florida runs pretty good. Florida doesn't have any of these restrictions. People are coming to Florida. Vote with your feet. You're still fully capable of doing that. And people have to take advantage of it. Yeah. And at the same time, for those who are moving, who are being like sort of the first movers, now you have the opportunity to create communities. You got the opportunity to be, living in a city where the energy is dynamic and people are building things, and there's not this static, stuck, stale energy and the sense of cynicism. So it's not like the whole world has gone bad. There's lots of places that are thriving. Go to those places. Be willing to be bold. 200, 300 years ago, I mean, this is like the cliche about America being like a land of immigrants. It's land of immigrants. Okay, whatever. They're predominantly like white Protestants from England, but whatever. America was legitimately built by people that were in their home country and said, this kind of sucks. Let's just go to this new country. Adopt that pioneering attitude.
Yeah.
You're not a tree. You can move.
Absolutely. And this sort of, I mean, I think this is a good segue into, the reason why I wanted to talk to you today is because a few months ago, and I think you've just consistently been recommending this book, The Sovereign Individual, James Dale Davidson and Lord William Rees-Mogg, and unbelievable book. I've had quite the experience reading it, especially with all the events that are happening in the news today, where it's always interesting to me to read books from like the 90s where they're trying to call and, kind of predict what's going to happen in the next, 20, 30 years in the turn of the century, whatever. And this one is unbelievably, at first when I started reading, I'm like, there's no way the United States would fall apart. I kind of live in this world, this kind of world where it's like, hey, the United States, best country on earth, there's no way this could ever happen. It's almost just like the regular patriotic propaganda I think, most Americans grew up with, until you start to look at the news and you see what's happening today with the, massive migrations between states, people really choosing their government, people choosing their destinies by, leaving large companies and working for themselves. Even today, I saw you tweeted and, there's an article about a legislature in New Hampshire that is trying to push a vote to secede from the United States, which is, it's something that we're also seeing like other parts of, Oregon want to join Idaho, Montreal wants to separate from Canada. There's a kind of globally, we're seeing this change of events, this kind of change in the current of, these large nation states, and then the, duality with kind of developing your own personal sovereignty. And so I'm curious, first off, like, when did this book hit you? Like, how did you discover it? And then, in your experience, how much are you like able to map this onto everyday reality?
So I think I found that book, and I wish I could say who recommended it. I actually don't know, but it came to prominence.
Divine.
2018 is when I read it. 2018. 2018 is when I read it. And I was already kind of like future casting at that point, because I could just see the United States changing dramatically. And I read that book and I was like, wow, I think this is pretty much like calling the future pretty accurately. And it was talking about, it doesn't say crypto in the book per se, but it talks about this rise of digital currency, and digital financial networks. Yeah, cyber currency was the term for it. I'm like, this is all really happening. I'm like, oh, this is amazing. But that book recommends like, okay, if you want to become a sovereign individual, like, what do you got to do? Like, you have to separate yourself from this nation state identity. And the nation state identity I was already familiar with, because having studied history, in high school, I still study history. The nation state phenomena is a very recent phenomenon. Historically, for the overwhelming majority of human history, how did empires develop? How did nations develop? They were tribes. And then there were ethnic groups. And then one ethnic group, maybe in particular, might dominate an area, and then they call that a kingdom, based on the people being of the overall plot of land. And if you travel the world ever globally, this is something that it's difficult for Americans to conceptualize, because we don't actually think of ourselves as being tribes. Like we're from
Yeah.
a state. Oh, I'm California. I'm from California. Cool. You know, you're from Michigan. You're from Florida. You're from DC. You're from Vermont. You know, we don't have blood in the soil the way that someone does if you go to, let's name a country. You go to Thailand. You go to Romania. You go to Bulgaria. You go to Egypt. You go to Greece. You go to Turkey. You visit various countries, and you realize these countries are not just, you know, let's say Turkey, for example. They're not just Turkish. It's this whole collection of different tribes and ethnicities that live under what was the Ottoman Empire, which is today now Turkey. And in most places in the world that are not the United States, or, you know, well, South America you to exclude as well, but for places not the United States, those people have been living there for hundreds of years, thousands of years. Like they are of the land. That's how they identify themselves. And that's originally how most states and nations and empires formed. And you, like I said, you have a dominating group. They come to power, they sort of unite the people, then you go into the next group. You'd have king, you'd have a line of succession, he'd get replaced, and then there'd be the next line of succession. You know, you saw this in France, saw this in Britain. Like there's just so many countries where like that's how it operated. It was a kingdom. There's a kingdom and collection of people. And then we get to the nation state period in the 20th century where, you know, it was both intentional and it was probably like natural evolution where that emphasis on ethnicity and that kind of blood is de-emphasized, and let's just think of ourselves as being a nation of one people, you know, under this, you know, sort of this mega structure, which is now, you know, the modern state, and that's who we are. We're all British, we're Irish, we're Scottish, we're American, and that allows you to fit in more people, and you can accommodate different identities. And if you have a shared set of social values, it actually can work quite well. But that comes with its own pitfalls. And we've seen that in Europe, we've seen that in the United States, where when you get a very diverse group of people together,
Yep.
and they're diverse in a way where they don't share social values at all, it just starts breaking down. Because they no longer, if you don't have shared social values, then your perception of how you want your society to evolve, you don't have one. You're going to be at odds with each other. And that's progressively gotten worse and worse and worse the last 2 decades. And yeah, in the situation you live in now, and the book talks about this, like violence is increasing. Not violence as in war. We're not going into a world war. We're not lining up one army next to another army. But in places where there is social disarray, you know, California, for example, petty crime is increasing. Crimes of opportunity are increasing. Larceny, vehicle break-ins, you know, battery and theft. You see this, there's like new talk now of like, oh, how are people going to protect themselves? Like, oh, I guess we'll have to kind of like form a gang or like a local neighborhood watch / mafia to keep the peace.
You know, these things.
Yeah, yeah. These old ideas that were sort of done away with in the 20th century, now they're reemerging again, saying they're increasingly relevant. So like, you know, so like, what do you do in that situation? Like I said, you have to be positioned, you know, geographically. You also have to be positioned, you know, financially, where you're not stuck somewhere. Yeah, and that's, you know, that's my, you know, fear for a lot of people. They're going to find themselves in a situation where they can't leave. I mean, I had some guys in my inner circle group who were in Australia. They were in that situation. Like, oh, Australia, yeah. Oh man, this is getting really heavy-handed. Let's just say it was getting really heavy-handed. These lockdowns are getting really strict. Oh, now you can't leave, which is a very weird thing to think about, because for anyone that's probably been alive the last 100 years, you've never been in a situation where you can't leave your country. You can't leave your house. You can't leave your county. You know, maybe you couldn't travel to somewhere, but you'd be prohibited from moving at all. Suddenly it becomes very real to people that we have lost something fundamental. You don't want to be in that situation at all. Like you don't want to be in that situation, because what comes next? When you had everything taken from you, now you're at a point where you're renegotiating your ability to go to the store, you know, board a plane, you know, driving your car. You know, rights taken are not rights given. You know, anyone that is, I think anyone that's smart knows that. You know, governments, once they take power, they don't give it back. You know, and the modern, you know, nation state, you know, nanny state, which every country right now that's like a first world country is somewhat socialized, even if it says it's not. Is there's all these expectations now as to what the state's supposed to do. You know, the United States is like that. You know, we can say we have Democrats and conservatives, but the U.S. overall is becoming increasingly socialized. It's now expected that your state or your federal government should do this and this and this and this and this, and you should give more money and we should all have STEMI checks, and universal income is now in the conversation, and we deserve healthcare, we deserve all these things, and some of this is not unmerited, but you're creating this super top-heavy, onerous government structure that, okay, like if we're going to give you all these things, we can also take things away, and now you found out the hard way.
And so the alternative is, developing your own sovereignty, which, sort of with the technological improvements, with the internet and, with like what you've been able to do with your own life, you're able to essentially establish your own, be your own entity and vote with your dollars, vote with your feet, and choose your future. I'm curious from your perspective, both given that you have a track record in developing this for yourself, and your ability to spot these trends. What did you do to prepare for your own existence? It's like there's like a part of me which is like drives to, I'm like, hey, I could be a prepper. I could get a nice plot of land out in like the middle of nowhere, stock it full of food, do all that stuff. But the alternative is you may need to just up and leave and, not have a place that you can call home. It's like, sort of, where do you fall in that as far as, preparing for this in a reasonable way, not becoming a psychotic prepper by any stretch of the imagination, because that can be equally can be equally useless in the event of emergency. Where do you fall in this, personally? What do you do in your own life to kind of like align your objectives to be ready for the future?
So you have to profit from possibilities. I don't advocate prepping at all. That's like in my mind, that's a sort of a cop-out solution. The world can go to shit. So if I just buy land somewhere in the middle of nowhere and I build a farm and like it's completely self-sustaining with a wood burning stove, and I don't have to worry about anything. I'm like, okay, like there are, in an absolute cataclysmic situation that might actually happen. But guess what? The world always rebuilds. Yeah, I think that gets very overlooked by the nihilist kind of perspective that people often have. Like, I'm not one for cynicism and all that way, where even when things get really bad, the world rebuilds. The Black Plague happened. You know what? Europe rebuilt. The Antonine Plague happened even before that, years prior. The Empire rebuilt. The Ottomans invaded. You know what? The city, Constantinople, it became Istanbul. You know what? It's still a nice city. It's a great city, great city in the world. Okay, cool, whatever. So things like invasion and short of having your entire society genocided top to bottom, you might have a natural cataclysmic event. You might lose electricity. You might just have an economy that really has gone to shit. Okay, there's still opportunity available. Today, it's in today's world. I point out a lot there. Obviously, there's physical assets. Like I buy, like I'll give actual examples. So like I still buy into the stock market every single month. I got that set on to the auto invest. Why are you buying the stock market? What if it crashes? Yeah, it might crash, but on a long enough time scale, the U.S. economy is worth trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, and it's crashed before. Crashed in the 1930s, crashed in the 1980s, not as bad, and it came back. It might take 10, 20 years, but it comes back. So I'm making a long scale bet that the U.S. economy may not the country as we know today, but the economy is still going to exist. I feel that's a very reliable bet. Okay, so so I buy in the stock market. I buy crypto. Crypto. I know all the criticisms. What if the internet goes away? I always crack up at that one. What if electricity goes away? What if there's an EMP blast and wipes out everything that's electronic in the world, and we're living like in the Middle East? Like, if that happens, then if you are someone that owns horses, I guess like you're the richest guy in the fucking planet at that point. Okay, great. But I don't think the internet's going to disappear overnight for forever, nor do I think electricity is going to go away for forever. I don't take those things seriously. What could happen? Could the dollar really decline in value? Yeah, that's already happening. Inflation's already up. Okay. Well, what's crypto doing? Oh, crypto is going up and up and up, up and up and up and up. The total capitalization of the market right now is over $2 trillion. Maybe you should buy some of that. What about the internet? The internet's growing massively, and now just and I don't just mean digital things like NFTs, but if you have digital properties, if you have a following, if you have a network of people, if you have an email list with thousands of people on you can contact, if you have websites, if you have content, if you have products that you sell, if you have a business that actually caters to that economic interaction between people or business to business, or business to consumer, you got an asset. Economic business, the online businesses are insane. You have crazy profit margins, extremely lean to run. Like they're unparalleled compared to most brick and mortar businesses that way. And even if you do want brick and mortar, there's tons of franchises that exist. There's tons of business opportunities that exist. Baby boomers are getting older. Gen Xers are going to get older. There's a huge market for aging elderly people with money where they want to spend it. There's a huge market for healthcare. So the opportunities are all there. And so like, well, what do you do? Well, you got to buy into stuff. You actually have to put some money into it, literally. Like I said, so stocks I buy every month, crypto I buy every month. There's people that I individually invest my time with to increase their exposure and help build their followings. Why? Because now I'm creating this really massive network. So if I want to get on the phone with somebody and like, I need whatever the hell, hey man, I need, I'll pick something. I need military training. I need to know how to fire a gun really well. I want to spend 2 weeks target shooting and learning how to live off the land. Can you help me out? Yeah, sure. Come to my facility that I have and we'll do that for you. Wow, that's crazy. Cool. So I can go get survivalist training, tomorrow if I want to. And most things that I would, let's say need in a situation where it's like, do you know somebody that does this? Well, I got the modern Rolodex. I got my newsletter. I got my own network. I can literally make a phone call or send a DM and someone will reply within minutes and cool. Let's make the thing happen. I'm not an atomized person, living in isolation where it's like, oh fuck, I can't depend on anybody. I know people I can depend on, and I have people that depend on me, and it's mutually beneficial. It's a great thing. You want to create that kind of circle that way where everybody's helping each other out. And so like you can do all these things. All that's possible. Even with living in Florida, I'm trying to set up a meetup like in November for my group of guys and some other people. Awesome, let's get 100 people together in Florida. Let's all become friends. People are already doing these things in real life. You have to make the initiative. You have to take action on it. You're not going to be. I mean, if you don't take action, you're just going to be alone, and you're going to be one of those people wondering, like, what do I do? What do I do? Talk to someone. Actually, contribute something to the world. You got to produce more than you consume. So that's how I would handle that. And at the same time, too, speaking on a more geopolitical global level, certain countries, even the United States, parts of the U.S., there is going to be a decline in quality of life. That's already happening. But in other states, there's going to be an increase in quality of life. So go to that place. If you really want to be adventurous, we could call like third world countries right now, second world countries. El Salvador being an example, some of the South American countries where they're talking about like they're going to use crypto, they're going to embrace it, they're going to make it legal tender. These countries have a once in a lifetime opportunity for themselves where it's like, oh shit, like we can basically say fuck off the IMF. We don't have to take out loans from the US or the Chinese. We can build up the strength of our own economy because we're a small country and we're not going to have to be dependent upon paying debt to some other bigger country organization. Like we can do this with crypto. That's really freaking cool. I expect other countries to follow suit doing that. Certainly. Even the city of Miami right now has talked about that. It's like, oh, we accept Bitcoin. We're going to support the crypto industry. We don't know how, but we're going to. Awesome, let's do this. So the grassroots support is definitely there. You need to go to those places and you need to connect with those kinds of people.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of these. I don't know how to describe them, an online, offline network. There's people that you interact with online. That's actually, that's how we were connected in the first place. Mm-hmm. I understand that you have your own, you have your own private group as well. And I'm seeing these pop up all over the place. And I mean, I'm curious from your experience, both sort of being a part and also, having your own group. How is that, what can you say to someone who's skeptical about these organizations and joining one and paying the cost of it? Because usually they do not come, it's not usually like a free to enter thing. And I know I see people all day on the internet sort of complain about that kind of stuff. Like, what do you say to that?
I mean, this is what goes unrecognized. If you look at social institutions in the United States, at one time, the US had tons of fraternal organizations, had tons of community organizations. Like if you look at, I think it peaked right around the 1970s, I want to say, where things like Moose Lodges, things like,
Freemasons,
Freemasons are, community block parties, or having like, neighborhood networks. Again, you could look this all up, but the United States at one time had very strong,
social
what you
cohesion.
call it? It had very strong social cohesion, but it was on like the community, city, literally neighborhood level, and that started to disappear around the 1970s, and slowly it declined up until very recently. And now, people are sort of like, it's been like a revitalized idea of like, oh wait, like I don't want to not know my neighbors. I don't want to not have any kind of network. Like, let's do that over again. Yeah. So people think it's this new idea. It's not a new idea. What are you doing when you meet people online? You're part of an online community. Okay, you're finding a tribe. You're meeting like-minded people. Maybe some of you are much more action-oriented than some of the others. Make a group. And when people obviously pay for something, they feel like it's worthwhile. Like if you're going to be, I mean, flat out, if you're going to be cheap about it, it's like I don't want to pay for shit. Like that's just entitlement.
Yeah, that's
it's very weird to me. Like, I think of all the money that people spend on college education, for God's sake, this entertainment bullshit, and then the idea of like paying to be a part of a group where you're actually trying to actively improve each other and make more money and be more self-aware and develop financial independence and like really basically increase your personal education. Like, oh, that's stupid. Okay. No, like, okay. Like you're not going to make it.
Yeah.
Honestly, you're not going to make it.
Well, that's the meme of the hour, right? It's the not going to make it NGMI. Like, who's going to make it? What do you have to be paying attention to? And, just to add to that, like, I think that there's so much value that comes from interactions and network. Even so with college, it's like you could spend all that money, burn that money on tuition and fees and books and so forth. But the real value that anyone will tell you about university is the people that you meet there, not so much the course content and such. We've already talked about how this information is available online, and it's, there's the deluge of information, like you said. And that value of meeting people in real life is tremendous, especially if there is an instance where the internet is no longer what it is, or if it becomes more locked down and you don't have the same freedom to maybe say what you want to say on there. It's going to come down to, who do you know in real life? And, it's sort of interesting part of this world that I'm noticing is people from the internet are starting to group themselves in certain areas. Like, you're seeing so many of these people off like crypto Twitter going to Miami. You're seeing a lot of people accumulate in the same local geographical areas. And, I just say to anyone listening, it's like, watch those trends, watch where people are going, because, where the people that are like-minded to you are going today, it's likely where you'll want to be tomorrow in the event that, this fragmentation continues. You look at, if you want to stay in California, or do you want to move to a place like Florida that's attracting a lot of the people that you want to be around anyways. What do you say to people that have cold feet about making these large moves, making these life decisions? Because I think that's another thing that I've noticed in your, the history that you've described to me is you've been able to jump into these things, jump at these trends, where one of the most common objections I get from anybody is that they're sort of afraid to take that next step. They're afraid to diversify their portfolio into crypto. They're afraid to quit their job and start their own individual business. What do you say to people that have that cold feet about diving into the unknown and sort of the undefined, worlds of, the digital future?
Well, you do or you don't. If not them, it will be someone else. It's very common that people have imposter syndrome where they just lack confidence with making those kinds of decisions because it's a bold decision. If you don't make it, someone else will, and they'll succeed. The internet, and I would say even real life as well, it's very common that we overestimate the stress of any sort of situation. We overestimate like we think of all of the bad things that could happen if it doesn't work out. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. The actual consequences are probably going to be much more minor than you think they would be. And what if it does work out? What if you fly? I've described the same formula for years for people that start internet-based businesses. Like, all right, so you have to create content. You need a strategy to get traffic to whatever it is that you're doing, your business or service, and you do that every day. It's not anything profound. It's a stupidly simple formula. People don't do it. Why? Well, it's hard. You have to do it every day. You have to work a job every day. What's the difference? You realize that there is a segment of the population where they need the instructional list of steps given to them. Otherwise, they just will not take action. Which, if that's you, then that's you. If you are someone where you are self-made, self-driven, like you want to be in control of your life, then act. Yeah, there's no special words I could give you. Like I said, fundamentally comes down to either you do or you don't. And you'll see people that do, and they're gonna succeed, and then you're gonna wish you were them.
Yeah. So a lot of people just simply won't make it then. Do you got time for a couple more questions?
Oh yeah.
All right. So one that I wanted to ask you is, with all the change and opportunity, sometimes my mind projects out, to some ambiguous period, 40, 50 years away or something, where assuming that many of the systems today have fallen apart, the world has changed, and we have the opportunity to create systems, kind of rebuild, you get into that rebuilding phase after, some dramatic level of change. To you, first off, I'm curious, do you also think in those terms of there'll be this point where things are sort of rebuilding, they're sort of re-energized in the way that the population was maybe, 50, 60 years ago, post World War II, where we have that kind of energy again? And if so, what excites you about that time? What do you think about as far as, what the future of society could hold in if we had the opportunity to rebuild today?
I think the building spirit will probably, as I said, reach critical mass like in 5 to 6 years. It's proceeding towards that point, but it's not fully there yet. Because what needs to happen for that critical mass to to finally emerge is that you need to be completely unafraid of like the nation state response, where it's like, hey, let's secede from the union. Let's say for a state, it's like, oh, what if the government attacks us? What if it doesn't? What if we just call their bluff and it's like, all right, come shoot your own citizens then. Come fucking do it, motherfuckers. Come do it. Like you're gonna hit that point where, like, that's always a breakaway point. Anytime any state fractures, any empire fractures, where it's like, fuck this, we're gonna start our own kingdom. Do something about it. We dare you. That will be the point where it's like, oh wait, like if this state can secede, we can secede. Wait, this group of people literally built their own city. We can build our own city. Yeah, once it becomes fully possible, then it just takes off.
Yeah.
The big game changer, I think, for like legitimately humanity, and this is very out of left field, but if we can ever achieve astro mining, so the number of extraterrestrial bodies in the solar system that pass by us, there's a lot of them. Now, a lot of those asteroids have immense material resources. They got gold, they got platinum, they got rare metals, they got iron. And they're huge. If we could ever actually grab one of those and actually and literally mine it, we can mine the asteroid, we would solve every material shortage imaginable that we suffer from today. Where today there's a chip shortage. Oh, there's not enough palladium. Oh, we have a shortage of platinum. There's these very particular minerals that we need to produce chips. Lithium, yeah. Like if you solve that completely, where it's like we no longer have a shortage of anything, basically. So anything that's whether it be subtraction engineering or addition engineering, where you're like sort of like 3D printing, where you're just putting stuff together, very low waste. If we could do that, that's where you'd see like a huge, probably like peak. Well, I would say peak, but you'd see the sort of next step in like civilizational progress of like, oh shit, we can build anything. Now, if we can build anything, well, let's think of shit to build, right? Let's dream big. Could we colonize the moon? Could create some first space stations? Could we go out in the stars? That idea is, this is the thing with the modern age. Like it's very cynical of like, we don't think about space travel anymore. It's like space travel, that's for rich assholes. Fuck them. What does space travel represent? It represents pioneering spirit. How can we expand our literal sphere of influence, beyond the planet? How can we start doing that? You know what? If we get a big enough asteroid and it's got 100,000 tons of rare minerals on it, oh, well, now we can do a whole lot, and we can build. We can try things. We can experiment, and that will be a cool time period. That'll be a probably time period of human history where maybe we finally start seeing like high technology things that are thought of today. They're hypothetical or prototypes. Now they're actually being built. Now we actually have that not utopia, but we have that scientific future where we got flying cars, or let's say we have hyper efficient public transportation. We have energy, like truly energy efficient cities. We're not dealing with a power supply limitation problem anymore. How far out is that? It's probably 20, 30 years in the future. But I think by mid-century, by the time I'm an older man, let's say when I'm in my like 60s, that's when I think I'll like see that finally come to fruition. Like, all right, like it finally happened.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see at what time frame. I mean, I always think that progress can only be as big as the frontier. So if we're capping ourselves to Earth, then it's sort of like at some point we're going to bottom out, and people like the cynicism sort of takes over. Whereas like turning to space, turning to opening up that world of possibilities and kind of infinite growth, like you said, or infinite industry with an abundance of natural resources, like it sort of makes anything possible, which is pretty exciting. As far as also just optimistic future facing stuff, I mean, like what else are you excited about in the future that maybe we've talked a lot about the changes and the turbulence and the disruption, but it's like what is there to be excited about? What should people in with your ability to spot the trends, what do you think people are sleeping on now that they should be excited about?
I would say the ability. So I mean, this is where it's paradoxical. Like, so Neofeudalism, you got this extreme wealth inequality. At the same time, this is the easiest time in history to make money, because legitimately, if you just have an internet connection, you can make money.
Yeah.
Which is, it's just fucking absurd. It legitimately is. You can be one guy or two people, three people. You have a Wi-Fi connection. You can build a business. You can create a product. You can create a service. You can educate yourself, whether it be coding or something else, or there's all these intricate moving pieces at the back end of the internet, and you can innovate. You can educate, and you now are financially free. And the upper limit of your income is really wherever you want it to be. How big do you want to grow? Okay, well, if I want to make millions of dollars. Okay, like you can do that. So think of a big idea basically, or go into a big industry, and like that's all possible. So upward mobility is like there's no limits on it. There's actually not. Like that's the irony to this. Like as extreme as the wealth distribution is, upward mobility, there's no actual limitations. I mean, we could bullshit and say, oh, about systemic racism or some dumb shit. Like, who gives a fuck? I have a guy that I pay in India right now in Ethereum every single month. Yeah, like he lives in like, where's he live? Like Hyderabad. Like that's wild to me. I'm like, okay, I'm paying this guy in crypto on the other side of the world to help run my business. How do you get that job working for me? Send me a DM.
It's insane.
So I mean, if you want to make money, like you can make money. Like, and money is freedom. Like money fundamentally is freedom. Like you can't dismiss that. Like you talk about what does it mean to be free? Make a bunch of fucking money. Like honestly, just make a bunch of fucking money, because if you're wealthy, if you manage to get to that state of affluence, the problems that the common man deals with are no longer your problems. Now you have a different set of problems, and it's a lot better to deal with financial wealth problems than to deal with poverty problems. So do that for yourself. There's this idea that I think it's more almost like a psyop. That almost like you hear this, especially like the 20th century, of like not everybody's cut out to work for themselves. It's bullshit. I'm like, yeah, okay, like yeah, sure, whatever, fucking whatever. For most of human history, you would have had a farm. You would have lived on like an agricultural plot of land. You would have actually been responsible for your own subsistence. You probably had the skills to pay yourself and manage a business at some level. Is it going to be $1 billion business? Okay, probably not. Is it enough to live on? Sure it is. You don't undersell yourself that way. I call it like the artisan economy, where 200 years ago, if you want to have a higher standard of living, you'd learn a skilled trade, and you'd start doing that trade, and then maybe you'd eventually teach other people to do the trade, and businesses arose out of that. The guys that were shipbuilders eventually became the guys that owned the fleets of ships. Like literally, that's kind of how certain companies came to prominence, or came to existence. So that's all possible. And then the other things I'm optimistic about, like for those countries or for those states and cities that are embracing the future, they're going to do so well because they have all the intellectual capital, they have all the enthusiasm.
Yeah.
So it might be bad a few states over, but it's freaking great here. That spirit of building was lost the last few years, and it's finally starting to come back. Like you have to dare to dream. You really do. You have to dare to dream. What can we build together? not who could we work for, what could we build together. And the United States is still the most business friendly, best country in the world for making money. If you can find a way to get paid in USD, you are golden. You still have an immense advantage over every other nation. And everybody wants US dollars still. We saw Afghanistan get taken over by the Taliban. Okay, that happened. All the politicians were fleeing Afghanistan. They're getting their houses, raided after they've left. What do they find? Stacks of US dollars.
Yeah.
That was their backup. That was their backup currency. That was their store value. It was USD. So inflation obviously is happening, but USD is not going away. And the United States is still materially an extremely rich country. It's got first dibs on every single supply chain. Like it's going to work out. It might be rough for a period of time, but it's going to work out.
Awesome, man. I mean, I love it. I love the idea of tapping into that entrepreneurial spirit. Runs deep in the United States, and surrounding yourself with that kind of energy. I think I'm with you. It's going to be unbelievably abundant what's created through that. Last question for you. You're a wealth of knowledge, and with that knowledge comes great perspective. And I think that's from everything we've talked about today, I think people would be surprised if they had never met you or talked to you before that. You had started with the ambitions of being a ballet dancer, liberal arts college, personal trainer, and to have such a wide perspective on the world and all the trends that are currently occurring and how to get on top of them, and which I think you do obviously tremendously well at, and also echoing that on the internet and on Twitter and sharing with your followers. I think it's just you're one of the best followers on the internet, 1,000%. With that, where does the information come from for you? Where are some of the books, influences that you would recommend people sort of tap into to understand a little bit more about what built your mental framework?
There's two parts to this. So the old paradigm for sense making, since this is what really like a lot familiar with what we're talking about. How do you make sense of the world? If you're telling me that like I can't follow the narrative and like these old ways of thinking are not working, like, well, what am I supposed to do? Well, ontologically, epistemologically, like we're talking about sense, like how do we reason our way through reality? So one of the big changes that everyone needs to do that gives you better sense making is news you need to disregard completely as this being a source of credible information. If you want to know what is happening anywhere in the world in particular, you actually like what you want to know legitimately, factually, find someone who lives there, or find a person who specifically works directly in that industry and follow them. This is why Twitter is amazing. You can curate a network of people where if I want to know what's happening in Afghanistan, I have a list of people that I follow who live in Afghanistan, who like they live there. I can ask them, literally send them the DM firsthand, what's going on today in Kandahar? What's happening in Kabul? I'm not beholden to relying on rooters of like, well, the news said this. I don't give a fuck what the news says, Larry, about anything. It's negative credibility at this point. And anyone can do this. Anyone can. So I call it like a sense-making network. I want to know what's happening with the economy. I want to know what's happening with China. I want to know what's happening in my own state. Like there's news feeds. There's individuals that cover all these things. If you live in, if I live in I remember when I lived in Venice. I'll give you an example. So when I lived in California, there was a feed I followed on Venice and an Instagram account as well. They would report on local crime in the area. And the people that made that account lived in Venice and Santa Monica. And they just kept up to date on the police scanners. They actually did. So I mean, that's like a very simple thing, right? But it's very innovative because the way most people, like I said, think about making sense of the world is that you're going to rely upon like a secondhand source. You can get firsthand sources. So you can curate this network of individuals that provide you intelligence. And this is if you actually ever study the history of like a spycraft, and what is like the Central Intelligence Agency. Like, what do they do? It's very, very fucking swarthy, cloak and dagger shit. This is what intelligence agencies do. Like, this is fundamentally what they do. You can do the same thing. I want to know what's happening in, pick a country, Morocco. All right, like let's go to Morocco and build a relationship with somebody that lives in Morocco. And then if we know what's happening in Morocco, we ask the guy that lives in Morocco. Like, I mean, I'm making it very redundant, but it actually is that simple. So this is what intelligence agencies do. They do this all over the world. They just have a station in that country or that town or that city, and they just have on the ground contacts of like, so, hey, can you tell us what's going down right now? And then, oh, okay, well, we our sources in such and such country say this is what's happening. It's like, okay, well, my sources that literally live there right now, who I could talk to, they say this. So I don't need to rely on your sources. They're probably unreliable and can be completely fabricated, since the news fabricates pretty much 100% of the news all the time. So create your own intelligence network. And this is what having it like a network itself is good for. Like to be with my inner circle group I have, there's over, we have like around like 400 guys actively in that group. They live all over the world. It's like, I want to know what's happening in Brazil. I just want an opinion. What's happening right now in Brazil in the election? Like, how do the Brazilian people feel? Since I don't live there, I can go ask my buddy who's Brazilian, who lives in São Paulo. What's it like right now where you're at? Oh, this is what's happening. Oh, I think it gives a whole breakdown. Oh, wow, that's really cool. I don't need to open up a newspaper. It'd be behind. So you have 24/7, sense making, intelligence. You have a potential for an intelligence network literally at your fingertips. You can create. So that's the first thing. In terms of books to read, like The Sovereign Individual, obviously I could recommend that. That's a great book. I don't read too many things that are current, like, but what I call like sort of the pop science, pop culture, pop, political books.
Yeah.
Like the Fire and Fury kind of shit, where like the Trump administration or this is what's happening. A lot of them are very much like flavor of the moment. I doubt they're going to give you any real insight into a situation. You'd be better off almost just probably following the author online, on necessarily even reading the book. But the older books that like I've read for perspective, like I'm reading a biography right now of Saladin, the Muslim ruler from the 12th century, who conquered Jerusalem. Studying history and taking that sociological perspective is helpful. Oswald Spengler's The Decline of the West is one that's a really good one. Rene Guénon is another. He's a French author from like the 19th century. But book-wise, like, I mean, this is the thing. I would never discourage people from reading, but I think most books are actually going to be sort of like behind the curve, because they're being written as the situation's changing. You're better off just following people, like on Twitter or Instagram, or even YouTube, for example, is quite amazing with its reporting. I'm astounded. Sometimes there's accounts I find where I'm like, wow, this guy's reporting on this here, shit. So why do you read books? Like, you're reading books more for like a broader, holistic, psychohistorical perspective. Which is there's various authors that are good for that. I mean, that covers so many different subjects, obviously. There was one book I read from the 1980s. The Closing of the American Mind. I think it was Alan Bloom. I think it was. And so there's another book that came out recently by Jonathan Haidt that has a similar title.
Yeah, it's interesting.
The Closing of the American Mind. So this is a book from like 1980s, and I found it fascinating because in this book written in the 80s, he described how public education, university education, higher education was failing to educate Americans. It was creating this generation of idiots, because of various reasons, because of this, sort of like what now we call like wokeism taking over universities, and it was diluting the education, and you're creating a generation of people that can't critically think. He wrote about this over 30 years ago. Yeah, like over 30 years ago, and it came true. So sometimes reading those books, like Christopher Lasch is another example. Most of his books are from like 1970s, 1980s, talking about the betrayal of the elites, where he pointed out 40 years ago that we're creating this neo-feudalistic society of extreme wealth concentration, this elite class that doesn't have to follow the rules, and everybody else. And these people fucked us. Like, that's an old book from the 1970s. You can read it. It might give you some insight into the modern times.
Yeah, I mean, I like I said earlier, like I love books that are from that time period, kind of projecting out into the future, because the ones that are still relevant today are likely the ones that they hit the nail on the head. And that kind of goes with all books that are timeless. It's like there's a reason they're still around. So like focusing on the classics, focusing on historical figures that have their influence remains prominent for long period into the future. So I appreciate that, man. I appreciate the insights. I definitely want to look into some of those books and dive through them myself. Alexander, man, I really appreciate your time today, your insights, perspective, and everything. This is such an interesting time to be alive, such an interesting time to have the tools at our disposal that we do. And I think you're able to utilize them and manipulate them better than almost anyone out there. So, appreciate the content that you produce, and following along with it is just awesome. So
you're welcome, man.
For the audience out there, where can they find you? Where should they be directed?
So Twitter is obviously the largest account. AJ_Cortes, I'm on Twitter. Also on Instagram as well, same account. The place where I tend to give the biggest downloads in regards to information, perspective, future casting, and also actual fitness advice, since it technically is still what I do. So the newsletter that I have, which is on cortes.site, sign up for the newsletter. I send that out usually 2-3 times a week. And that's where I'll go deep on different perspectives and subjects. And then, like I said, some of it's also just the actual, just applicable fitness knowledge, stuff you can use to get healthier. But the newsletter is where I do definitely my best writing and work. Everything else, Twitter obviously is very topical. Instagram is, it's short format stuff. The long format stuff to really make you think, it's going to be on the newsletter.
Got it. Awesome. Do you have any final asks, requests, or words of advice or anything for the audience before we wrap up?
Okay, I have a course on online business and all the accompanying principles that I'm launching in November with my buddy Jose Rosado. I can give you the website to sign up for like the waiting list for that. But that'll open up in November, and that will be a 4-week cohort actually, where it'll be, obviously it'll be done. It's an online course, but it'll also be done each week, where it's going to be Q&A with myself and Jose, and we'll be covering everything that goes on to the actual operation of running an internet-based business, in depth. You can ask questions, and you also have the opportunity to network with the people who are in the course, while you're doing it. So that'll be coming in November. So definitely look out for that.
That's awesome. That's tremendously valuable. If you've enjoyed what we've talked about here, and this sort of perspective of the future makes sense to you, I couldn't imagine a better opportunity if you're still stuck in your 9-to-5 than to learn from you both, and learn from you and Jose about how to build an online business and start to establish your own sovereignty. So that should be really awesome. I'll blast that out, send over the link for sure. And yeah, man, it's been an honor. Thank you again. And we'll talk soon.
Likewise, bro. Good talk.
Thanks.